hey, this is going to be one of the first videos that I'm going to use a script. It's not really unscripted, and it's not obviously going to have that emphasis of points from the heart. I've just got a bit of notes that I made throughout reading the book, and I made them to my own notes, and well, I'll be using them to give you the key takeaways from this book. If you don't think you have the time necessarily to read this book, but you want the information, you can just watch this video and you'll get it. That being said, I always recommend you to actually read the book, because you can have a different perspective and thus get different ideas out of the book, because we can look at it from different perspectives. So this book, I advise someone who's interested in psychology, economics, and also self-improvement. This is a book that you should read. It provides a ton of gold mines and hidden gems. The first point that this takes away is the fact that the world that we live in is stunningly complex. It's ever changing and it's very, very complex. Simple things like, for instance, making a toaster requires so much complexity, and as a result, things that we currently, as us normal people, think are rather simple, and to a fault we actually simplify it. We have to bear in mind that they're not really as simple, and they are very, very complex. And this is also a byproduct of why a lot of us think the leaders that we have, especially during the time we live in, are very, very bad leaders, because we demand from them too much, because we fail to see that the world is really complex and that it's not something that one leader can really solve. It requires a bunch of people at this point. And well, as a result of us not understanding how the world truly works and its complexity, as well as its variability and the fact that it changes over time, we are essentially blind to the world. We are blinder than we think. Failure is everywhere. Something that we a lot of times associate failure with negative stuff. We're like, oh man, I'm a failure, I'm this, I'm that. No. Failure is everywhere. In fact, success comes usually from failures. In fact, for instance, if I give the example of the American economy, the American market could be very well said as the best market in the world. However, every year, around 10% of the whole company ceases to exist. And the market essentially fumbles its way to success. When you look at, for instance, stocks, for instance, you will see, like, let's say this is a graph, it won't just go like this. It'll have up, downs, and then fumbles, up, down, fumbles, and those corrections are what is necessary for that market to experience further growth and healthy, sustainable growth. The simple reason why could be broken down into the idea of evolution. Now, evolution is something that occurs in nature, and well, essentially this will also then travel to every other aspect of life. In the same way that bad genes die out and the good genes survive, bad ideas die out and they get removed when the market fumbles, and only the good ones survive, and as a result they cause the growth. And as a result, our mindset should not only be just to see the successes, although companies take advantage of that and can make very, very risky approaches. However, they know that, let's say, the 80% that fails, that remaining 20% that is a success, they can show that, and as a result, people will just love the company. They'll focus on that 20%. In fact, that's what most successful companies are. They are so much failures, but they divert your mind from those failures and end up talking about successes. And this is something that's called survivorship bias, when we tend to forget about the failures and only focus on the successes. And really, if you want to truly understand the world, you don't need to only see the successes, you need to understand that there's been failures, and then those failures and learning from those failures and adapting led to eventual success. And evolution really, as I wrote here, it balances between having new ideas and familiar ideas. We don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. However, we need to be able to get some innovation as well, because new approaches can provide us great significant values. Someone in the 1700s or the 1600s would never have even thought about the internet. Yet we know that the internet has been very, very pivotal. Similarly, right now we will not think of some new futuristic technology that would have been very, very impactful. And this is all about the process of evolution. And when you want to reach success, you need to have some familiar ideas, but then you also want to be able to experiment. The greatest way to success is by doing this. And it's simply a mix of, small steps, and then you have those occasional gambles that, when you use those two together and you use those as a process, will result in the best possible way to reach a certain solution to a big problem. And this is all about the idea of trial and error. So trial and error is what, in an ever-changing world, is the best thing to do. It's the best thing to do, and it's something that will produce greater results than just a pre-planned idea, because pre-planned ideas, they can face a ton of factors that would otherwise break the whole idea together. And if you don't adapt and change, then you'll be at a loss. And so the best way to actually go about life and go about creating solutions to ideas and creating product and whatnot, innovation essentially, is to seek out new ideas, seek out new things and try them out, allow them to grow. A lot of us immediately criticize them from the get-go and never really allow them to develop. And by not allowing them to develop, we actually prevent ourselves from even gaining a tiny bit of success from it. For instance, the idea of a lottery, for instance, is that, people who don't buy a lottery ticket have a 0% chance of winning the lottery. But someone who buys a lottery ticket doesn't necessarily have a 0%. It's almost zero, but it's not zero. And after you've developed them, test them out. You should always apply your ideas. Try testing them out. See how it works in the real world. And obviously, if it works, then great success. However, if they fail, and a lot of the times you will fail a lot. The book shows that, several times, governments even, who have the smartest minds of society, will fail a lot. And the thing is, you need to realize your failures and learn from your mistakes. By learning from your mistakes, you will change, you will adapt, and you will repeat this process on and on and on and on again. And this process is a very iterative process. However, it lasts it's the best model for improving yourself, and the best model for finding a solution to ideas, best model for a company to go about doing something. something that really people don't understand, or people can hear it but they don't understand it. People who do truly understand it can really go far. Is the fact that trial and error is the best way in this world to go about life and to go about change. Trial and error does not mean that you're just doing random wild gambles. You obviously have some calculated or semi-calculated things and predictable steps and familiar steps, but you also have to have those wild gambles that can lead to innovation. But to accept trial and error in your life and to accept it as a process that you should do for trying out new ideas and being very innovative also means to accept error. And that is something that people don't really like to do. In fact, for instance, when you're losing money, for instance, in a gamble, you will see that a lot of the times they'll still stick to their guns. If anything, they'll double down, when really the wiser, the more logical approach would be, to step back and reevaluate your choices. And so our brains are not really adapted to that, but allowing yourself to accept error and to accept that mistakes will be made in the process and to learn from them, not celebrate them as triumphs, but to learn from them, and that lesson and that adapting that will lead to success, you should celebrate that part instead. And you need to know when you have failed, and a very good way to do that is to measure progress and to have people around you who can really give it to you as it is. It's like, you know what, we have failed here. Let's reevaluate the situation. You can even do that yourself. And the reason why people don't acknowledge mistakes and learn from them and really separate them from their self-worth is simply because of three things in this book. One is denial. Denial that those mistakes have even occurred in the first place, because no one likes to accept the fact that obviously they've made mistakes, and it will give them a punch to their ego or to their self-worth. You should always bear in mind that as silly as it sounds, mistakes are not your true self-worth. Mistakes are not your true self-worth. Mistakes and self-worth are two completely different ideas. You are not a failure, you just make mistakes. People have made mistakes over a very, very long period of time. I know people throughout history who now we regard them as very, very good people. For instance, Abraham Lincoln, for instance, Elon Musk, Albert Einstein. Even genius minds like them have made mistakes. They believe in ideas that have turned out to be wrong and have done mistakes in a lot of different things, but they are not failures. People make mistakes, but don't join those two together. If you have a mistake, just say, I made a mistake, but you're not a failure. It does not have anything to do with your value as a human or the value you provide in the market. It's just that you've made a mistake and you're going to learn and improve it. That being said, let me just finish the first point, then I'll just say this one major point. Second is self-destructive behavior. So self-destructive behavior is simply that we will essentially make all of the problems, to essentially make peace with one problem, will commit another problem, so that problem is now lesser of a problem than the other one. But then that's a big problem, and then you repeat that step again. You repeat this process again. You're making mistakes on mistakes just to rectify the previous mistake, and this has happened a lot in history, and the book really talks about case studies where this has happened. And this will prevent us from learning our mistakes, because rather than us learning from our mistakes, we're making another mistake so that we can pretend that that mistake is not a big mistake. And the third point is to remember the past mistakes rather than mistakes, to remember them as triumphs. We need to know that mistakes are mistakes, and a lot of people have insisted that these mistakes are not mistakes and actually triumphs, and this links back to denial. But if you are going to celebrate mistakes, you should know that the mistakes was made and you should learn from that mistake. The lesson learned from that mistake, which leads on to success, is the thing that you should be celebrating. You shouldn't celebrate the mistake, not the actual situation, but the lesson learned from that situation. One major thing that we need to also remember with failures, and this is something that I think is a very big point that the book makes, is it calls it the Pochinsky Principles, and I've noticed that when I'm doing like anything, I always try to apply it to my life. And it's simply this: you try new ideas. If you fail, you make that fail survivable, and then you use those failures and make feedback and improve and adapt. But that idea of making failure survivable is what can allow something like Google and something like IBM or like the US Steel Company, for instance. This is something that can really change the whole demographic and the whole situation. Google, for right now, is like a very high, big company, but the US Steel Company is not a speck of what it was at its peak. And that's because the failures that it made were not survivable, really not survivable. But Google can make mistakes that are survivable, that if they make failures, it's not necessarily the end of the company. And a way to do that is by taking small steps. And those small steps allow you to explore those ideas that could be potentially risky, and setting up systems in place with your business or with everything that they're not so interlinked that, let's say that you fail in one part, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the whole system collapses. And that's the main takeaways from the book. However, I also took another thing that I really inferred from the book, and it's to do with the idea that you have to put in the effort and the hard work and the adapting ability in your life. And those you will see a lot of times in the news, like, oh, this person who did little work, and they have made a ton of money, they've been very, very successful. Know that those are exceptions, they're not the rule. Media loves to show those exceptions and present them as rules, but they're really not. You have to know for what they are. They are exceptions, they are not rules. And so something that I know a lot of people, including myself at one point, used to think was that, oh man, like you'd have like, I guess, jealousy. But I stopped having jealousy for a long time now. That's something that could be a good video to talk about later. But just remember the fact that, those people who haven't put the hard work but get the great results, they are exceptions in the world. They are not the rules of the world. And this should not deter you from anything else. Rather, if you think about it, they might have achieved success earlier, but your road to success will be more legendary. Overall, this book, I rated it 4.5 stars out of 5 stars, which is essentially a 9 out of 10. It's a book that it breaks down complex issues. In fact, this book goes on to talk about climate change and other problems, and showing how complex it is and how we can use this idea, how his ideas and like trial and error can be able to solve it. And otherwise, I think this book, if all his books are of the same caliber as this, then I'm all for reading it. That being said, Thank you for watching this long video, and have a lovely day.